In 2024, the video game industry had layoffs northward of 14,000 people. And already in the beginning of 2025, it's almost 1,000. Last episode, I talked a little bit to some people, I would say a little directly, that had recently experienced layoffs. And I think it was important for me to do it because it validated, from the sounds of the messages that I got, a lot of their feelings. As I said, it was being blamed on a bad economy, and you see this all the time. And I'm not discounting the truth of that, actually. I know that that does happen. There can be great studios with really solid leadership that face this problem as well. More often than not, it's just simply not true that that is the key factor. So, in my experience, I worked at a number of different studios, and I've spoken to a lot of different people and heard over and over again the same story, this shared problem. Of course, it's probably just coincidence, right? But it is a lack of vision, direction, and passion. So, to those who have been laid off, I have a simple question for you. Did you have a deep sense of something was wrong for a long time, but you couldn't pin it down? You couldn't express it, or if you could, you were ostracized for it? Does that sound familiar? I would say the familiarity, again, goes across all these different studios. And here's some key things that I remember from my time. Endless meetings about nothing. Decisions made after baffling and incomprehensible jargon sessions where I was mentally exhausted, but I felt that I had learned less and actually left the room knowing less more often than not. You would see this massive overhiring before there was a solid vision, which in almost every case leads to months and years of work, which just leads to nothing. You can kind of see this in some of the bigger failures of the last year. If you know much about the games industry, there have been 2 to 3 colossal failures that took 10 years to make. And this is the key thing: overhiring before even having a vision. Often these projects are directionless. You have leadership that says, "Oh, I'll know it when I see it," and they have their team endlessly making art or doing writing or game design, and then in a meeting throwing it out. And from my perspective, it's simply out of personal taste or how they're feeling that day, and not from a system of strong values or passion. Confusion, chaos, and endlessly unanswered questions. So does that sound familiar? I mentioned the Mad King archetype, and that was in my last episode as well. If what I briefly mentioned here sounds familiar, it means you have sat at court to a Mad King and his flying monkeys. Today, for those who are looking for a new start at a new company, I am going to share some key traits of a Mad King. Essentially in the hopes that you don't fall victim to another era of office tyranny for a company that's very likely destined to fail, especially in these times that we find ourselves now. Welcome to the Sons of Men podcast, a conversation dedicated to meaning in the lives of men, offering a window into the life and trials of masculinity, where we talk about family, spirituality, creativity, and legacy to better understand each other and to offer solutions for the next generation of young men striving for a better future. I'm your host, Curtis Weeb, a father and husband, addict in lifelong recovery, and an advocate for men seeking to transform their lives and through strength change the world outside their window. This is episode 17, Disordered Edicts of the Mad King. Well, today's episode isn't particularly aimed at men. I think this episode hopefully can help people from any walk of life, It's really important in this time when people are looking for new jobs and taking a shot with a new team. Hoping that I can share some wisdom and some things that I've learned. I feel I have a pretty good sense for this type of behavior. Sometimes you are going to experience these different traits that I'm going to be going over in smaller ways, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you are in the court of a mad king, so to speak. Sometimes people just have odd behaviors, and it's more about connecting all of these things or a pattern of behavior. I want to start with a quote from Gaius Sallustius Crispus, most often shortened to Sallust. He often spoke about corruption in the Roman Empire, and this is a quote from him: "Kings are more prone to mistrust the good than the bad, and they are always afraid of the virtues of others." I think that's a great table setter for what we're going to talk about today. Today is a conversation about the traits of a mad king, or, as I like to just say it a little bit more flatly, weak men in leadership. I mentioned Game of Thrones in the last episode, and I am going to start off this list by talking about Joffrey Baratheon. Sometimes we look at that archetype in that show and we look at it at more of a surface level, but what is actually going on there is something quite complex and something that really ties this whole episode together. Joffrey Baratheon wasn't straight up evil. I think it would be easy to dismiss him as such. What he really had going on was this boyish sense of entitlement, and in the mindset of I am king, a lack of accountability or perceived lack of ability. And that made him both dangerous and despicable. These are the common traits of grown men today who fail to lead with any measure of grace. That is how we're going to start off our list. The first trait is a jovial liar. And this is what I would say: words and actions never align. In my experience, they're often quite a joker, laid back, they're your friend, quite often have this false humility, which at first seems really endearing. Over the course of time, when you start connecting to these other traits, it actually is quite alarming. But they also like to layer on praise and attention to people they deem loyal. Just a quick aside, loyalty actually doesn't mean what most people would believe it to mean, which is I would go to battle for you and I would expect the same, that if we were going through something together, we would have each other's backs. Loyalty to a mad king is submission. It is doing as you're told. It is more of a pet situation than any actual measure of love, which loyalty should come out of. Laying one's life down for their friends type of loyalty. They often, though, cast these people out, these loyal people out, the second they step out of line. And so the loyalty is often one way. And you often see a trail of dead, so to speak, from people that have been too close to the sun in these types of scenarios. They often preach personal and company values publicly that are directly opposite of the reality within the company. And I think, as I said in the last episode, people know when this is true, and I think often rationalize it away and dismiss it. But this is a really serious problem. Promotion of values that are not true. That is a very worrying pattern of behavior. This one's a little bit harder to tell, but they actually often pit employees against each other through rumor spreading and undermining with aid from his flying monkeys and key members of court, which I will get more to on that later. And those employees are often tricked and they believe the Mad King and the things that he is saying. We often trust people We trust the words of people because we would hope that others would do the same for us. That is not a weakness. That is a strength. Trust, honesty, vulnerability, being open to people and open to criticism. These are good things. These are good traits. But a mad king will manipulate those traits of goodness against you. This leads me to a second trait, blustering buffoonery. Criticism is considered disloyalty. Often when you give feedback or criticism about potentially a decision or a direction that the project is moving, it is taken as a personal attack. And weirdly, a mad king has a victim complex around it. There's kind of a sad sack, woe is me type behavior that follows when they take it as a personal attack, which is very confusing to anyone who is emotionally centered, because you're simply offering feedback on something to make things better, but it's never taken that way. Emotional and age inappropriate responses. So like I said, there's this sort of boyish entitlement. There's often a reaction from these personality types that is very confusing and leaves you feeling quite uncentered and unbalanced, because it's totally unexpected in a normal conversation amongst adults. And often they'll shut down, or they'll just leave the conversation, leave the room, or come up with an excuse. They'll pick up their phone and stare at their phone and totally check out. Very immature behavior that, again, as an adult is very disorienting. And you often take that on as a fault of your own, that maybe you've done something. Really, depending on the personality of these mad kings, they will use different tactics to unsettle you or disorient you. They'll use guilt or shame, intimidation sometimes. They will have a private one-on-one meeting with you and the real personality emerges. Commonly across the board, they have a total lack of accountability. There's lots of blame shifting, excuse making, and quite often they will throw other people under the bus, people that you work with, or they will say, this person said this about you, and I'm really ashamed that they would say that about you. It kind of goes back to pitting people against each other from point one. So there's a lot of strange emotions around a mad king that in an ordinary situation with your family or your friends, if you have a disagreement or a falling out, generally you can get to the root of it through earnest conversation. And sometimes it's difficult, but you can get there. These mad king archetypes, you can never get there. And it seems to take on a larger vortex of chaos the longer these relationships go on, the longer you work for these companies. Which leads to point 3, mad edicts. The grand plan is an insane plan. And well, what do I mean by that? Often their ambitions or what they see the project or the product being is completely disconnected from reality. Shipping a AAA game with 20 people is a good example. A AAA game in the games industry, often 2, 3, 500 people, sometimes 1,000 people, and insisting that I believe that this team can pull it off with no vision already in place. It just makes no sense. And while it's meant to be aspirational, it's more delusional. Often these kinds of aspirations are also wrapped in a lot of meaningless words. I call it word salad. It's a pretty common term for these sorts of conversations, usually full of catchphrases and industry buzzwords. And the industry is full of them, by the way. I can guarantee you, all of you have heard a game for everyone is a game for no one. It's like every bad director in the games industry uses that term right now because it's what other people say, and so they just adopt it into their language. But if you ask them what that means, they probably can't answer. Yet everyone is routinely making games for no one in the industry right now. You're probably also familiar with, I watched a movie this weekend, or I played a new game this weekend, and it completely throws any kind of forward movement. If you've been able to pull something together, it completely blows it up, because now you have to add in Iron Man into your fantasy game. It is a constant derailment of any kind of forward movement. And it's kind of the last point to point three of Mad Edicts is whims, feelings, and personal taste. This is a deadly trio of chaos. Feedback is so necessary in the development of a product. And when you have a really solid director, their job is to ultimately make sure that the product itself is fantastic. And you want them to have a vision, but also open to any kind of new or inventive ideas that can make it better. And that director should just corral it into something that fits the shape of what already exists. But when you have a director that, again, knows it when they see it, or it's based on a whim or a feeling or a personal taste, how many times have you heard someone say, yeah, this is great, I just don't like the color blue? And it kills all conversation. It kills any kind of learning that can happen, because it's incomprehensible what it is that is the actual problem. I always say that good feedback and evaluation or art critique, when it comes back, you've done a bunch of work, there's a few key criteria that you should really lean into. But one of the key ones for me, the top one, is when somebody presents something and the room is lit up with new ideas and new questions, you lean into that and follow where that actually goes. Allow the conversation to take it into an interesting direction. But if a presentation leads to a dead room, and often this happens when there's feedback out of personal taste, I just don't like it, well, that's a bad sign. That's also bad leadership. The fourth trait of a mad king is a court of dangerous fools. This is the sycophants and flying monkeys that a mad king surrounds himself with. And these are by far the highest contributor to chaos in a system like this. It is hard or impossible to talk directly to the mad king. And it's often done through triangulation. You hear from those closest to him and around him, well, the boss said this, and the boss wants it done this way. And if you actually manage to talk to him, he may have said something different, or it's this constant shifting of information and language that leaves you feeling completely untethered. And often these flying monkeys speak for him. And of course, nothing can ever be confirmed because they are the last stop. And so you are forced to believe whatever it is these sycophants say. And you'll notice that those in the king's court, these sycophants and flying monkeys, mysteriously gain more power and influence in the company, and yet no one knows what they actually do. Nobody knows what they're doing on a daily basis, and everyone just kind of quietly accepts it. And it's often, I've noticed too, it's kind of they do it quite cleverly. They guise it as being very helpful, and oh no, don't worry, I'm not actually taking this title. It's just to help, it's just to help the boss make sure that things are lined up when they're out of the office. And they always phrase it in friendly and helpful language, but then when they solidify that power, it's a nightmare. And then you are in real trouble once those flying monkeys secure those positions. Another trait of the Mad King is stolen valor. They often leverage past success against all criticism. The weird thing is that those past successes are often not actually theirs. And in more cases than not, those successes were made despite them, not because of them. They just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And this one's actually a pretty good one to follow up and Speak to other people who have worked for this person before. Word gets around, and while people often don't have the ability to speak truthfully while employed, they will speak afterwards. I know this because when I went through a lot of the mistreatment that I did at the several companies that I worked for, I left and just started reaching out to people who kind of disappeared mysteriously, which gets me to point 6: injustice. Truth, good, honest values are punished, and honest people are often isolated. And this is the one that really frustrates me and makes me angry, is that if you ask about those people, why they left, or what happened with them departing the studio, they will often invert the values of those people. I heard numerous stories about specific people that left these companies, and they were spun in a way that made them look, well, downright devious. And then over the course of months or years, I got to know these people, and they were lovely, incredible people that I would call friend to this day. Someone who might love to work with people. Oh, well, they just wanted that title. They wanted the power because they wanted this studio for themselves. They often project their own values onto those people to discredit them, which to me is loathsome behavior. All this said, a quick summary. A mad king is a jovial liar. Their words and actions never align. Blustering buffoonery. Criticism is disloyalty. 3, mad edicts. Their grand plan is often an insane plan. 4, a court of dangerous fools. They're surrounded by sycophants and flying monkeys. And quick aside, those people never get fired when the layoffs happen, even though they probably should be the first to go. 5, stolen valor. They leverage past success against criticism or use it for recognition or boasting. And 6, there's a deep sense of injustice for the people that speak honestly in the studio. They are often bullied, isolated, and mistreated, and besmirched when they leave. So to all of you out there in the industry, and I'm speaking directly to the games industry right now, it's a tough time. I feel it too. I haven't been able to find work for almost a year, and I'm worried about the future just like all of you are. And my prayers are with each and every one of you. You're going to be taking interviews, and you're going to be walking into a new scenario and potentially another mad king. So I think you need to prepare yourself. What are 5 easy questions that you can ask? I think you can get a sense for this stuff pretty quickly once you know what to look for. Before I give you these 5 easy questions, I want to validate all of those feelings that you had about the chaos and feeling like something was wrong but not being able to voice it. I would say really listen to that voice the next time you walk into a situation like this, and ask around. Ask if other people are feeling the same. You're not alone in these scenarios. The whole studio is often the victim of these kinds of weak men, these mad kings. And there is power in numbers, and maybe you can demand or actually create change if you do find yourself in this situation. But here's 5 easy questions that you can ask to potentially avoid another scenario like this. 1, can I get a straightforward, easy to understand answer to a simple or complex question? 2, do I feel confident and safe in asking the question? 3, is there a feeling of clarity, unity, and understanding coming from my leaders? 4, am I able to voice concerns, feedback, and new ideas without strange or bewildering responses? And 5, am I made to feel like a problem for speaking truthfully or demanding truthfulness from leadership? In episode 3, Band of Brothers, I talk about traits of a good leader. I would highly recommend you go listen to that, because these are all signs to look out for in dangerous work environments, socially, spiritually, emotionally. In episode 3, I talk about traits of a good leader, someone that, and they exist. I know they exist. I've met men and women that lead with those examples, and we need more people like that. So give that episode a listen about what you should expect from leaders and what you are worthy of. We're all heading into a tough time, and I am there with you. I guess at this point, I really don't have too much to lose. I'm working on my own project, and hopefully it works out. A part of me is a little hesitant to speak this openly about these behaviors that I've seen, but I really do hope it helps anyone out there who has been victimized by these awful people, these weak people, these corrupt people. And I am always here to listen to your stories. If you want to reach out to me, you can email sonsofmenpod@gmail.com. I had numerous people reach out to me on LinkedIn after I posted this there. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate the really kind comments that you sent my way. I'm a small little podcast, but I'm doing what I can to share the wisdom that I've gleaned over the past several years. As I said in the last episode, don't give up. Things will turn around. And if they don't, let's just make a new way. And until then, God bless.